I know the exact moment my love for Kang Moo-jin died. It was not when he announced his engagement to Choi Yen-hwa. It was not when he told me, coldly, without looking at my face, that I would always be an outsider in this household. It was not even the morning I packed my belongings and left the only home I had known since the age of 7. It was 50 years before any of that. In my past life, Moo-jin died in his sleep on a winter morning, his hair fully white, his body finally surrendering to the decades of old battle wounds he had carried in silence. I had held his hand through the night. I had been the one to close his eyes. And then I found the painting. It was hidden beneath the floorboard of his private study, a place I had never thought to look in 50 years of marriage, because I had believed there was nothing in this man I did not already know. The painting was small, exquisitely rendered. A woman with a plum blossom tucked behind her ear, her lips curved in a smile I had never seen directed at me. On the back, in Moo-jin's handwriting, "My white plum blossom, the only light I ever wanted." The woman in the painting was Choi Yen-hwa. I had spent 50 years trying to become enough for a man whose heart had never been mine to begin with. In this life, I would not make that mistake again. I came back at 18. Same household, same walls, same courtyard where I had learned to walk after my parents died and my legs forgot how. But I was not the same girl who had spent her childhood trailing after Kang Moo-jin like a shadow desperate for light. The first thing I did upon waking in this body, this young, whole, unexhausted body, was lie completely still and breathe. The second thing I did was make a decision. I would not follow the path Moo-jin had laid out for me. I would not sit for the classical literature examinations he had selected. I would not shape myself into the kind of woman who might one day be worthy of standing beside him at a formal reception. I would become a physician. My parents had been military physicians under General Kang's command, healers who had spent their lives on the edges of battlefields, their hands in wounds, their voices the last things some men heard before they stopped hearing anything. I had been 7 years old when they died, too young then to understand what they had given, old enough now, old enough twice over, to know it was the only inheritance worth claiming. The Hae-min So, the Royal Bureau of Medicine's Physician Training Institute, accepted women of good standing. The training was rigorous. The posting after graduation could take you anywhere in the kingdom, including the front lines. It was exactly where I wanted to go. He returned from the northern garrison on an afternoon in late summer. I was in the kitchen preparing shikye, the sweet rice drink I had learned to make specifically because the heat in this part of the compound was insufferable, and no one else seemed to notice. I heard the gate. I heard his boots on the stone. I did not go out to greet him. Through the latticed screen, I watched Kang Moo-jin cross the courtyard with Choi Yen-hwa at his side and felt, for the first time in this life, the precise shape of what I had let go of. He was still everything the eye wanted to rest on, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying his authority the way a sword carries its edge, without effort, without announcement. He had always been beautiful in the way of things that do not know they are beautiful. Yeonhwa walked beside him in pale green silk, her hair dressed with white plum blossom pins. Of course. Her voice carried clearly through the screen, sweet as overripe persimmon. General Kang mentioned his winter robes need relining. I've already asked my mother's seamstress to prepare the fabric. And these medicinal honey teas I had prepared, the physician said they would help with his knee in cold weather. A pause, perfectly timed. Oh, and I had a colleague at the records office source a complete set of the general's favorite historical texts, the ones that were damaged in the flood last spring. She reached up and straightened the collar of Moo-jin's overrobe with both hands. The gesture was practiced, intimate. The gesture of a woman who has already decided a man belongs to her and is simply waiting for the formality to confirm it. "I had these made for you," she added softly, producing a folded length of deep blue silk. I thought of you the moment I saw the color. Save it for our wedding day, if you like. I turned back to my shikye. Behind me, I heard the inner gate open, footsteps on the wooden floor, then Yunhwa's voice, bright with the specific sweetness of someone who has rehearsed their cruelty until it sounds like courtesy. Oh, Seya, I didn't see you there. She came forward and took both my hands in hers. Her nails pressed into my skin just slightly, not enough to mark, enough to remind. Don't mind what Mujin said earlier. You know how he gets after a long garrison rotation. He still thinks of you warmly. It's just a delicate pause. After what happened at the garrison farewell last spring, he's still disappointed. You understand. Last spring. In this life, I had refused to perform the elaborate farewell ceremony Mujin had arranged, the one designed to display me as a properly grateful ward, well-trained and decorative, a credit to the Kang household. I had simply not appeared. In my past life, I had stood in the courtyard for 3 hours in the summer heat, dressed in my finest, waiting for him to look at me once. He hadn't. I looked at Yunhwa's careful smile and thought, I know what you are. I just don't know yet how completely I know it. Thank you for the concern, I said. I'll go pay my respects to Mujin. He was in the outer hall reviewing garrison documents when I entered. He looked up. His expression did the thing it always did when he saw me now, a brief recalibration, the faint confusion of a man whose mental image of a person has not yet caught up with the actual person standing in front of him. I had changed. I knew it. I no longer wore the elaborate adult-style robes I had once used to make myself look older. I wore my plain student's jigori and chima, dark blue over white, the clothes of someone who had somewhere to be and intended to get there. You're back, I said. Not, I missed you, just the fact. He set down his brush. You've been avoiding the household duties again. Grandmother mentioned you missed 3 morning greetings while I was gone. I was studying. What studying? The classical literature preparation shouldn't require other things. I held his gaze. Was there anything else, Mujin Shi? The honorific landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the ripple cross his face, surprise, then a flicker of something I didn't try to name. In my past life, I had never called him that. I had called him Oppa until I was 15, then nothing at all, then husband, then nothing again. I had spent 50 years navigating the distance between us through the careful architecture of what I called him. Now I simply used his name, with the formal address of someone who respects the distance and intends to maintain it. You've changed, he said. I've grown up, I said. Wasn't that what you always wanted? I left before he could answer. That evening I saw the headlights. No, the lanterns. The paper lanterns of the household gate swinging in the night wind as Mujin and Yanhua returned from visiting the family of her betrothal contract. I was in my room, the thick paper envelope sitting on my writing desk, my acceptance letter from the High Minso. I heard his footsteps pause outside my door. A knock, then, without waiting, "Is that your acceptance from the Classical Studies Preparatory Academy?" I turned the envelope face down. Yes, I said. It arrived 3 days ago. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, and this was the version of him I had always found hardest to resist, the version that remembered I existed without an audience. You should go to the capital and show grandfather. He'll be pleased. A pause. Since Yanhua and I are occupied with the wedding arrangements, I won't have time to... He stopped, started again. You should go. It would be good for you to spend time with him. He's sending me away so I'm not underfoot during the wedding preparations. In my past life, this moment had shattered me. I had cried for 3 days in silence. All right, I said. Do you need a household guard to accompany you to the capital? No.
Then take the post road. It's safer than the mountain pass this time of year. Another pause. One more thing. After Yanhua and I marry, we'll be converting your room into family quarters. I'll have the east guest room prepared for you. Family quarters. He couldn't even say it plainly. I'll pack my things before I leave, I said. He went. I sat in the dark and looked at the Haimenso envelope and felt, for the first time in either of my lives, something that was not grief, something cleaner, something that pointed forward rather than back. The next morning, he was gone before I woke. I packed my belongings. In the wardrobe, still hanging, the silk robe he had commissioned for my coming-of-age ceremony, deep crimson, never worn. A celadon inkstone he had selected himself from 3 different market stalls. A small carved wooden rabbit from his first northern garrison post. I did not take any of them. On the writing desk, the painting we had sat for together at 14, him standing stiffly, me beside him trying not to look at his face. I picked it up, set it back down. From now on, let this house hold those memories for me. I did not need to carry them any further. I had been at the Haimenso for exactly 8 days when Mujin arrived. I knew he would come eventually. My school was in the Northwest Training District. General Kang's compound was in the capital. The Haimenso's student register was maintained by the Bureau of Medicine, which shared records with the military command. The Kang family's connections ran through every government bureau like roots through soil. It had only been a matter of when. I was carrying a water jar to the medicine preparation hall when his horse appeared at the front gate. He dismounted. He crossed the courtyard. He stopped in front of me and his first words were, "Who gave you permission to apply here?" Not a question. Behind him, Yanhua descended from the accompanying palanquin with the grace of someone who had practiced making entrances. Her voice was already warm with manufactured concern. "Seya, we went to such trouble planning your future, classical studies, a proper placement in a noble household, all of that work, and you throw it away to play at medicine?" I looked at Mujin. "I'm not playing," I said. "This is what I want." "What you want," he said it the way you repeat words in a foreign language, recognizing the sounds without quite reaching the meaning. "I have arranged everything for you, the academy in the capital, a household placement that would have given you a future. What you want has nothing to do with—" Mujin Kang. My name in my mouth fully for the first time in this life. No title, no softening. He stopped. "In what capacity," I said, my voice steady, "do you believe you have the right to determine my future? As my guardian? As the man I once loved so completely I forgot to love myself? Or simply as someone who has decided that my compliance is a thing he is owed?" The courtyard went very quiet. His jaw tightened. "Everything I've done has been for your benefit." "No," I said. "Everything you've done has been for the image of a grateful, manageable ward who causes no inconvenience." I held his gaze. "My parents were military physicians. They spent their lives healing the wounded and the dying. If they were alive, they would stand here beside me, not beside you." I saw the moment the words reached him, the slight flinch. Then Yanhua stepped forward, her voice cutting sweetly through the silence. "Seya, don't be childish. Mujin is only trying to help you. Is this about the wedding? Are you acting out because you can't accept that we're—" "This has nothing to do with the wedding," I said without looking at her. "Congratulations on your upcoming marriage. I hope you find everything you've been working toward." I turned to go. Mujin's hand closed around my arm. I stopped. "Withdraw from this school," he said. "Come back with me. Retake the preparatory examinations next year. I will personally—" "Let go of my arm." He didn't. I turned back. I looked at his hand on my arm, and then at his face, and I said very quietly, "In my past life, I gave you 50 years.
50 years of devotion so complete I had no shape left of my own by the end of it. You want to know what I found when that life was over? A painting, hidden away. A painting of her with your handwriting on the back. I watched the color drain from his face. So no, I will not withdraw. I will not retake the examinations, and I will not spend this life waiting for a man whose heart was never mine to wait for. His hand fell away. Yenhua's expression, just for a moment, in the space between one breath and the next, was not composed. It was calculating, recalibrating, the expression of someone who has just learned a variable they hadn't accounted for. I walked back into the school. 3 weeks later, my name appeared on an official government notice board, not for something I had done, for something I had been made to represent. The notice had been circulated by the Capitol Records Office, a formal document stamped and distributed to military command bureaus and government halls throughout the district. The language was careful, official, damning. Han Sea-ah, first-year student of the Haimin's Pho, observed at the Gwanghwa-mun Market District on the 4th day of the 9th month. Upon encountering a woman collapsed in the street, suffering a medical emergency, the student made no attempt to render aid, abandoning the fallen woman and departing the scene with haste. Below the summary, a small ink sketch, an elderly man kneeling on the ground, his hands outstretched, a young woman in student's robes turned away. At the bottom of the document, the name of the record's transcriber responsible for the filing, Choi Yenhua. The Haimen-so permitted students 1 day of leave per month to purchase supplies from the market. I had been at the Eastern goods stalls when I heard the commotion, an elderly man shouting, a woman collapsed against a market stall, her breath coming in the wrong rhythm, her eyes rolled back. I was a first-year student, barely 4 weeks into my training. I knew enough to recognize an acute brain episode. I knew enough to know that I did not yet know enough to treat it. I ran. I ran back to the Haimen-so as fast as my legs would carry me, and I found Professor Zhang at the gate, and I grabbed his sleeve and I told him in 12 words exactly what I had seen and where. He saved her life. The elderly husband had knelt before me afterward in the market street, not to beg, but to thank. He had been on his knees for the span of 3 breaths before Professor Zhang and I pulled him back up. In those 3 breaths, someone had made a sketch, and Choi Yenhua had turned it into an official indictment. My instructor, Professor Zhang, called me into his office the morning the notice reached the school. "The Bureau has received formal inquiries," he said. He folded his hands on the desk. "Several military command officials have written expressing concern about the character of students we are training. There are calls for disciplinary action." He paused. "I want you to know, Sioa, that I and every physician present that day know exactly what happened. We believe you, but the damage this notice has done—" "I'll handle it," I said. He looked at me steadily. "How?" "The same way Choi Yenhua handles things, through official channels, with documentation." The next time I saw Mujin and Yenhua was at General Kang's residence in the capital, where they had come to finalize the wedding arrangements. I walked in. I set the evidence on the table between us, the testimony of the elderly couple, signed and sealed. Professor Zhang's official account of events, countersigned by 2 attending physicians, 3 witness statements from market vendors who had been present, and a copy of the original notice with Yenhua's name at the bottom. Yenhua looked at the documents, then she looked at me with an expression that had gone completely smooth, the expression of a woman who has prepared for multiple contingencies and is selecting between them in real time. "Sioa," she said warmly, "I'm so sorry. The sketch was submitted by a colleague. I simply transcribed the accompanying notes. I had no idea the subject was you. You must know I would never deliberately—" "You know my face. You have known my face for 11 years. The sketch wasn't detailed. Anyone who has met me once recognized it immediately. I took a step toward her. I watched her composure hold perfectly, professionally. I want to ask you something, Yenhua. Mujin once told me you were extraordinary, so exceptional that he insisted I model my academic ambitions on yours. He used you as the measure of everything I was supposed to become. I let that sit. So I'd like to understand, is this what exceptional women do? File false official notices, use their position at the records office to distribute fabricated accounts of government students? Because I was under the impression that deliberately falsifying official documents regarding military-affiliated institutions was not simply a professional failing, it was a crime. Yenhua's smile didn't waver. You're being dramatic. The news cycle. We are not Sangis, we are subjects of the crown. Official records office documents do not have news cycles, they have legal standing. She opened her mouth. I cut her off. If you do not submit a formal retraction and correction to every bureau that received that notice within 5 days, I will file a formal complaint with the Bureau of Punishments for defamation of a student of Hyamen-so and incitement of public hostility toward the Bureau of Medicine. I looked at her steadily. I don't believe you want investigators looking closely at your records office access logs, do you?
Something moved behind her eyes, something that was not composed at all. Mujin, who had been standing at the room's edge in silence, stepped forward. And I felt the bottom fall out of something I hadn't known I was still holding on to, the last thin thread of the hope that in this life he might simply once stand beside me. Yanhua made an error in judgment, he said. His voice was measured, careful. She was given inaccurate information by a colleague. She didn't verify it before filing. That was wrong. But you, he exhaled through his nose, you could simply withdraw from the Hemenso, retake the preparatory examinations next year. This entire situation would dissolve. Is your pride really worth... Kang Mu-jin. He stopped. What about my future? My voice was even as everything underneath it was not. I passed the Hemenso entrance examination on my first attempt. I am in the top third of my cohort after 4 weeks. My parents spent their lives as military physicians. This is not pride. This is my parents' legacy. It is my dream. And because of a document filed by the woman you are about to marry, my name is currently being discussed in military command halls as that of a student who abandoned a dying woman. I looked at him. Does that mean nothing to you? Does any part of me mean anything to you beyond the inconvenience I represent? The room was completely still. Then Yanhua touched his arm. Mujin. I hit him. Not a slap. Both hands against his chest, pushing. The gesture of someone at the end of something. The gesture of a person finally releasing a grip they had maintained for 50 years plus 18 more. He stumbled back 1 step. His expression fractured. Hansa, ah! I'm done, I said. My voice was not shaking. I found this remarkable. Whatever I felt for you, whatever it was that made me spend a lifetime trying to earn the right to stand beside you, I am done with it. You and I are nothing to each other from this moment. Not guardian and ward, not family, nothing. I picked up my documents. I turned. One more thing. I looked back once at both of them. 50 years, Mujin. 50 years I gave you, in a life you will never know about. I paid that debt in full. We are even. I walked out. I filed the formal complaint the same week. The records office took it seriously. They had no choice, given the legal implications of falsified official documents touching military-affiliated institutions. Yanhua's retraction was published within the week. A cold official correction circulated to every bureau that had received the original notice. Her access to sensitive records office filing was suspended pending review. General Kang, when he heard, was silent for a very long moment. Then he said,
I always thought there was something wrong with that woman. I could never name it. He firmly opposed the wedding. I later heard that the confrontation between him and Mujin had been extraordinary, the old general's voice carrying through 3 walls, the kind of dressing down that left marks that didn't fade. Mujin and Yanhwa's formal engagement was suspended. I did not feel the satisfaction I might have expected. I felt mostly tired, and then I went back to my studies. I met Baek Junho in the 2nd month of my first year, in the dispensary at 3 in the morning. He was grinding medicinal bark with the focused expression of someone who had been at it for hours and intended to continue indefinitely. I had come in to check on a decoction I had left steeping. We looked at each other across the low preparation table without speaking, and then both returned to what we had been doing. That was, in some ways, the whole of it, and in other ways, it was everything. Junho was the son of a frontier physician who had spent 20 years in the northern border settlements, treating soldiers and farmers and border officials who had no access to capital medicine. He had grown up mixing medicines before he could read them, setting broken bones by feel before he understood the names of the bones he was setting. He had come to the Hai Minso not to elevate his position, but to learn what he didn't yet know. He saw me clearly from the beginning, not as a ward of the Kong household, not as the girl who had been involved in the Choi Yenhua record scandal, not as anything other than a physician in progress with competent hands and a habit of being in the dispensary at impractical hours. I found I could breathe around him without calculating the breath first. Border conflict broke out in the 11th month. The northern frontier, a stretch of territory that had been contested through a dozen cycles of negotiation and raid, collapsed into open warfare after a coordinated strike against 3 garrison outposts within a single night. The speed of the strike was surgical. The raiders had known exactly where to hit and when. Advanced Hai Minso students were sent to the military encampment within the month. We were not yet qualified for major interventions. We could not perform the surgeries that would save the most critical paces, but we could assist. We could dress wounds, administer medicines, sit with the dying, carry water, hold instruments, do the 1,000 small, necessary things that freed the senior physicians for the impossible ones. I had been on the frontier for 3 weeks when I stopped flinching at the sounds. I had been there for 6 weeks when I understood, in my body rather than my mind, what my parents had chosen to spend their lives doing. Every day I faced what I could and could not do. Every night I lay in my tent and catalogued what I had learned, what I had missed, what I would do differently when I knew more. I was exhausted in ways I had never been exhausted before. I was also, underneath the exhaustion, more myself than I had ever been. Junho was in the tent beside mine. We worked the same rotations, we made the same mistakes and learned from them together. When the worst nights came, and they came regularly, the nights when there were too many wounded and too few hands, and the gap between what was needed and what was possible became something you had to simply step over and keep moving, I found him beside me without having to ask. He never told me to be less affected. He never suggested that the correct response to loss was composure. He was simply present, the way certain people are present, fully, without reservation, without calculating the cost of it. I recognized this quality because I had spent my first life unable to find it in the person I had given everything to. I saw Mujin again 4 months into the frontier deployment. His condition had improved enough for transfer to the main medical tent from the critical encampment. He had lost the lower part of his left leg to a raider's axe during the 3rd week of the conflict, an injury that had been severe enough that the military physician's primary concern for the first fortnight had been whether he would survive at all. He was alive.
He was recovering. He would never return to active military service. For a man who had been a soldier since he was 17, who had built his entire identity around his military service and his command, this was a particular kind of ruin. It showed. Other physicians spoke of him in carefully neutral tones that meant something was wrong, the kind of wrong that was not medical. He had driven 2 nurses from his room by the end of the first week. He refused to eat consistently. He refused to speak to the physicians beyond single-word responses. He sat in the specific stillness of a man who is deciding something he has not yet decided. On the day it was my rotation to tend his ward, I did not let the charge nurse reassign me. I went in. He looked up from the window he had been staring at. His face when he saw me, I had not expected what I saw there. Not anger, not the complicated resentment I had been braced for, something much worse than either. Recognition, and beneath it, something that looked like a man who has finally, too late, begun to understand the weight of his own choices. I went through the procedure without speaking, checked the wound dressings, administered the afternoon medicines, recorded his responses in the patient register. My hands were competent and impersonal, and I was proud of this. When I was done, I turned to leave. "Say all." I stopped. "You changed your name on the register." He had been reading the patient records I held. "Han Sayal, not Kang Sayal." "I was never Kang Sayal. I am Han Sayal. I have always been Han Sayal." A pause. "I know." His voice was very quiet. "I know that now." I waited. "I treated you as though—" He stopped, started again. "I made you into something you were supposed to be rather than—" He couldn't finish it. I looked at him, this man who had occupied the center of my first life so completely that I had organized every decision around the circumference of his indifference. He looked older than 28. He looked like someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told it was never necessary. "Are you in pain?" I asked, clinically, the physician's question. He let out a short, broken sound that was not quite a laugh. "Yes. I'll note that the afternoon dosage should be adjusted. I wrote it in the register. I'll send the night nurse with the updated preparation." "Seah. Is there anything else, General Kang?" The title, his full formal address, the distance made absolute. He looked at me for a long moment, then he turned back to the window. "No," he said, "there's nothing else."
The truth about Choi Yunhwa came out in the 5th month of the conflict. The military command issued a formal statement following an investigation into the intelligence failures that had enabled the coordinated opening strikes. The strikes that had been so precise, so surgically targeted, that they could only have been the product of detailed insider knowledge. Troop positions, rotation schedules, supply line routes, communication protocols between garrison outposts. The investigation traced the leaks to the records office, to a series of documents that had been transcribed and copied far beyond their authorized distribution. Copies made over a period of 3 years, systematically, by someone with comprehensive access and the patience to move slowly enough not to draw attention. Among the names in the formal indictment, Choi Yunhwa, Records Office Transcriptions Senior. It all made sense then, in the way that terrible things make sense once the last piece settles into place. Yunhwa had cultivated her position at the records office specifically for its access. She had cultivated her connection to the Kang household, to Mujin, specifically for its proximity to military command. Every gift, every carefully maintained relationship, every year of patient positioning had been in service of a single purpose. She had not been the woman Mujin loved. She had been the mission he had been inserted into without knowing it. And the men who had died on the frontier in those first 3 weeks,
the soldiers who had been in the wrong positions when the strikes came, the men whose rotation schedules had been known to the enemy before they had been woken, had died because of what she had spent 3 years building. I sat with this information in the dispensary of the medical tent at night, grinding medicine, and thought about my parents. I thought about the thing I still didn't know, the thing that nagged at the edge of the story. How had military physicians come to be in the direct path of the raider strike that killed them 11 years ago? My parents had not been in a combat zone. They had been traveling a supply route, a route that, according to the garrison records old General Kang had shared with me at the time, had been considered secure. Unless someone had known they would be on that route, unless someone had passed that information along, unless the first leak had not been 3 years ago, unless it had been 11. When I returned from the frontier, I went directly to old General Kang. He was in his study, older now, smaller than I remembered, the way people who have carried enormous weight for a long time begin to look once the weight is set down. He looked up when I came in, and something in his face shifted immediately. He recognized the expression I was wearing. He had seen it before. He was wearing something similar. "Tell me about the supply route," I said, "the one my parents were on, 11 years ago." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I found the record 2 months ago during the investigation. I have been deciding how to tell you." He opened his desk. He set a document in front of me. The supply route my parents had traveled had been considered secure because it had been reclassified as a secondary route that season, information that was recorded in a single internal records office document, a document that, according to the investigation's access logs, had been copied once by an apprentice records transcriber in her first month of placement, an apprentice named Choi Yunhwa. The raiders who had ambushed that supply route had known exactly where to intercept it. My parents had not died because of a war's randomness. They had not died because conflict is indiscriminate and physicians are caught in its path. They had died because a girl of 15, in her first month of her first placement, chasing intelligence she had been recruited to gather before she even understood the full implications of what she was doing, had copied a document she should not have copied and passed it to someone she should not have passed it to. And because of that copied document, my parents had been on a road that was supposed to be safe. Old General Kang's voice was very old when he spoke again. "When she was first brought in for questioning, she was 15. Her family was noble. Her recruitment by the enemy had begun when she was 12. She had been identified, cultivated, manipulated before she was old enough to fully understand what was being asked of her." He paused. "That was the argument made for protecting her identity at the time, that she was a child who had been used." Another pause. "I made the decision to protect her identity. I believed she would be monitored. I believed the worst was behind us." His hands on the desk were very still. "I was wrong, and because I was wrong, I watched Mujin spend the next decade falling in love with the woman who had killed the parents of the child I had taken in." The room was silent. I thought of the painting, hidden under the floorboard, my white plum blossom. I thought of 50 years of trying to deserve a man whose heart had been claimed, not by love, but by a professional operation he never knew he was part of. I thought of my mother's hands, my father's voice, the things I couldn't remember clearly anymore because I had been 7 years old when I lost them, and memory is merciless about what it keeps. I thought, he has been carrying this for 2 months, alone. "Grandfather," I said. He looked up. "It wasn't your fault," I said. "You made the wrong call, but you made it trying to protect a child. That's different from what she did." I stood. "I'm going to make some tea, and then you're going to tell me everything you remember about them, my parents, everything you haven't told me yet because you thought I was too young." His eyes, which had been dry through all of it, filled. "All right," he said. "Yanhua was arrested before the season turned. Her trial was swift, the evidence was comprehensive, the nature of her crimes, spanning over a decade, implicated directly in the deaths of military personnel and contributing to the losses of the most recent border conflict, left little room for the kind of careful legal navigation that noble family connections might otherwise have enabled. She was stripped of her position and family registration. Mujin's role in the matter was investigated with equal thoroughness. He had not known. Every record confirmed this. He had been a target, not a participant, a man kept close precisely because his proximity to military command made him useful, his trust in the woman he loved making him exploitable. He was cleared of criminal culpability, but he was not cleared of consequence. His military rank, already suspended following his injury, was formally revoked. His military citations were struck from the record. For a man whose entire identity had been constructed around military service, around the Kang family's legacy of honor in uniform, this was a devastation that went beyond the physical. I heard he had stopped leaving his rooms.
Junho proposed to me on the day our cohort was formally commended by the Bureau of Medicine for our service at the frontier field hospitals. It was not elaborate. There were no flowers. We were standing in a courtyard of the military medical tent, and it was early winter, and nothing was blooming. He had a small carved wooden object in his hand, a rabbit, which I would later learn he had made himself during the night rotations when the ward was quiet, because he had noticed the rabbit carving that sat on my writing desk and had never heard the story of where it came from, and had decided to give me a new one with a simpler history. He knelt. "Han Seo," he said, "I want to spend my life beside you, not behind you, not ahead of you, beside you, on whatever road you choose to walk." His voice was steady and completely without performance. "Marry me." I thought of the girl I had been in my first life, the girl who had stood in a summer courtyard for 3 hours waiting for a man to turn his head, who had organized her entire existence around the circumference of someone else's attention, who had found at the end of 50 years a painting under a floorboard. And I thought of this man, who had been beside me in the dispensary at 3 in the morning, who had stood with me in the worst nights on the frontier without telling me how to feel about them, who had given me a carved rabbit because he had noticed what sat on my desk. I pulled him up from his knee. "Yes," I said. The courtyard erupted around us, our cohort, the attending physicians, even 2 of the senior teachers who had been passing through and pretended they hadn't stopped to watch. The noise was enormous and undignified and entirely wonderful. Somewhere in the medical encampment behind us, Mujin looked towards this courtyard. I did not look at him, but I hoped with something that was neither cruelty nor satisfaction, but simply the honesty of a person who has been through a great deal, that he had heard it.
He came to the wedding. I had not invited him. I had not told him not to come. I had simply proceeded with the arrangements. A modest ceremony, families and physicians, the people who had earned their places in my life through presence rather than obligation, and left the guest list to speak for itself. He appeared at the edge of the ceremony grounds as the formal proceedings concluded, leaning on a carved wooden crutch. His hair had gone partially white at the temples. He was 28 years old, and he looked like a man from a much longer life. After the ceremony, as the guests moved toward the banquet, I saw him approaching. Junho, who had seen him too, touched my hand once, a question, and I shook my head slightly. He nodded and stepped away to speak with his family, giving me the space without making it a departure. This was what it looked like, being seen by someone who trusted you. Mujin stopped in front of me. He held out a small cloth box. Inside, a jade hairpin. I recognized it immediately, the Kang family hairpin, passed from mother to daughter-in-law for 4 generations. Old General Kang had shown it to me once when I was 12, describing the women who had worn it before. In my first life, he had never offered it to me, not in 50 years.
I had always known it was meant for someone else. "Sia," he said. His voice was rough. He was not well. I could see that clearly. Not just the leg, but something deeper. Something that had been eating at him since the trials, since the investigation, since the full accounting of what his years of love had actually been built on. "Lord Kang," I said. He flinched slightly at the address. "That hairpin belongs to the Kang family. I am Han Sia. I was never a Kang, and today I become Madam Back." I closed the box gently and placed it back in his hands. "Give it to old General Kang to keep. Perhaps one day there will be someone it properly belongs to." His hands closed around the box. "I was wrong," he said, simply, without the elaborate framework of justification I might have expected. "About everything. About what you needed. About what I owed you. About her." He exhaled. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I'm asking for it. I just—" He stopped. "I needed you to know that I know." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know you know," I said. "I hope it gives you something to build on." I paused. "Go home, Mujin. Rest. Talk to the old general. He loves you, and he has been frightened for you." He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that was not the thing I had once wanted so desperately to find there. Something quieter. Something that had been arrived at through loss rather than given freely, which made it both more real and too late. "Be happy," he said. "I intend to," I said. I turned back to my husband, who was standing 20 feet away pretending to be entirely absorbed in a conversation about medicinal herb cultivation while watching me with the peripheral attention of someone who will be there the instant they are needed. I walked toward him. I received the news of Mujin's death in the 3rd year of my posting at the Frontier Medical Garrison. He had not been ill, according to old General Kang's letter. He had simply not woken one morning. The physician's assessment was that his heart, weakened by the battlefield injury and what the letter carefully called sustained grief, had stopped during the night. He was 31 years old. Old General Kang wrote, "He asked me, in his last weeks, to tell you that he hoped your work was meaningful. He said he had finally understood what your parents were. He said he was sorry it took him so long." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and placed it in the cedar box where I kept the documents from my parents. Their identification papers, their physician certifications, the old news clipping I had found among old General Kang's records that had led me, eventually, to the truth about how they died. I sat for a while in the quiet of the medical station, listening to the wind against the outer walls. In my first life, Mujin had lived to old age. He had spent 50 years mourning a woman who had used him. He had filled his study with her memory, kept her painting under the floorboard like something sacred, written her name on the back of the portrait in the handwriting of a man who had never stopped believing he had lost the great love of his life. He had never known what she was. In this life, he had known. He had been made to know fully, publicly, in the most brutal possible manner. He had lost his career, his rank, his identity, the narrative he had built his entire life around, and then he had had to continue living with the knowledge, without the mercy of ignorance. I did not know which life had been harder. I did not think it was the kind of question that had an answer. Junho appeared in the doorway, having returned from attending to patients. He read my face the way he had learned to read it, not intrusively, not with the performance of concern, just with the quiet attention of someone who is paying genuine heed. "News from home?" he asked. "Kang Mujin died," I said. He came and sat beside me. He did not offer consolation I hadn't asked for. He did not tell me how to feel about it. He sat with me in the space the news had opened, steady and present, the way he had always been. After a while, I said, "My parents would have liked you." "I know," he said, not arrogantly, simply, the confidence of a person who has examined himself honestly and knows what he has found. "I would have liked them." Outside, the frontier settlement was waking.
Someone was opening the medicine storage. The early patients were beginning to arrive at the outer gate, farmers and soldiers and the children of both, the daily, ordinary procession of people who were hurt and needed help and had somewhere to come to now. I stood. I put on my physician's outer robe. I went to work. This was the life my parents had left me. Not the grief, not the longing, not the 50 years of trying to earn a love that had never been mine to earn. These hands, this work, this man beside me who had chosen me clearly, without conditions, without the architecture of expectation. I had spent a lifetime learning the difference between being chosen and being settled for. It turned out the difference was everything.